Hey, welcome everybody. Kitzur Shulchan, the abridged code of Jewish law. We're doing chapter 46. We're up to number 13. Chapter 46, number 13. So we're discussing kosher. We're discussing separating milk and meat and how long we need to wait in between. And now Yud Gimel number 13. We're going to discuss. There's a few people coming from the waiting room. All right. So chapter 46, number 13. Im chasach b'sakin shel basa b'tzolim. So you have onions. Now onions are parif in of themselves. In other words, they're not meat, they're not milk. But if you cut the onions with a meat knife, and not only onions, or shada v'chorif, something else that's sharp, say like garlic, radish, pickled olives, lemon, horseradish. So something like that. And you chop that up on the sonim lemachal cholov, and you put these chopped up onion or other sharp things into a dairy dish. I behebach, or the other way around. You cut them with a dairy knife and you put them into a milk dish. Now now you have to ask a halachic authority, you have to ask a rabbi. So as we've said a few times, this is the abridged code of Jewish law. There's a whole section in the full Shulchan Aruch. So let's just discuss the issue a little bit, and then we'll move on. So we generally say that it requires heat to take flavor out of a knife or a utensil. So let's go back a step even before that. So let's start with a pot. Let's say we cook something in the pot, say meat. Now the pot has pores. Every object does. It has certain. What happens is it absorbs the flavor, the cooking in the meat in the pot, and absorbs the flavor into the pot. So if we would then scrub the pot totally clean, spotlessly clean, and an hour after we cooked meat in it, we now cook cheese. The flavor of the meat that's absorbed in the pot will come out with the heat and go into the cheese. And then we're going to have a remnant of meat flavor in our dairy food, which is a problem. So that's why we can't do that. But let's say it wasn't hot. Let's say I had some rice, cold rice. Let's say raw rice, right? Raw rice, and I took a meat spoon. And I use that meat spoon to take the rice out of the container that it's in, and I scooped it into a dairy pot, let's just say. So the spoon, even though it was a meat spoon, and it interacted with the rice, which now went into dairy, but the flavor from the spoon did not come out and get absorbed into the rice. Now, so it didn't affect it. Now, even though it didn't affect it, in general, we should try and avoid doing this, because what happens if we start using meat utensils, even in a permissible way for dairy foods, or someone's going to dairy or vice versa, it's a mistake waiting to happen, because one day it won't be perfectly clean, or one day it will be get warmed up or something will be hot. We should try and keep it separate, whatever we need for each one, separate, just to avoid any issues. But if it happened, so it's not a problem. One of the exceptions, though, is something sharp, like we're talking about now. Because the same way that if I put this meat knife into something hot, the heat draws out the absorbed flavor from the blade into the food. So the sharpness, something like an onion or a garlic or something like that, also absorbs out the flavor. The sharpness has a similar effect as to the heat. So if I cut an onion with a meat knife, it has the same effect, or similar, I shouldn't say exactly the same, but very similar effect to if I heated the onion in a meat utensil or heated a different vegetable in a meat utensil. The same way the heat would absorb the flavor from the meat utensil into the food, or cause the flavor to come out and get absorbed into the food. So the same thing, the sharpness of this onion or jalapeno or something like that, it draws out the flavor and becomes absorbed into the food. So if I used a meat knife to cut a piece of carrot, let's say, so carrot's not sharp. So after the fact, I could put this carrot into a lasagna if I wanted to. Now, like I said, we should try and avoid using meat knives on things that are going to dairy because they may not be clean. But let's say it was clean. After the fact, took the wrong one by mistake. So the question is, can I use this carrot now on my lasagna? I can, because it was all cold. There's nothing to create a transference of flavor. But if it's onion, the sharpness draws out the flavor and becomes problematic. So the reason it says here to ask the rabbi, because you're not meant to do it. Now the question is, what if it does happen? Right? It's going to depend on how sharp the food was. Was the knife used in the last 24 hours or not? Because it'll be even stricter. Was used within the last 24 hours. Was it really perfectly clean, the knife, or just cleanish? And how much of the other food relative to the onion or something you put in. So there's a lot of factors. So if this mistake happened in the kitchen, the best thing is to ask your local competent Orthodox rabbi, or I guess today with Zoom, they don't have to be so local, with telephone and everything, but ask who you ask your questions to. Okay. 14. So today we are so used to meat and milk alternatives. It's almost normal, right? Just to give a bit of background to what we're going to discuss, we have a concept called maris ayin. Maris ayin. So it's when something looks bad. So we mentioned this before. The example I think that makes it the clearest is you can imagine someone walked into McDonald's to buy a Coke. So Coke is kosher, but he's going to McDonald's and people see a religious looking person going to McDonald's and they'll think one of two things. Either one, they'll think to themselves, oh, I didn't know that McDonald's was kosher, but it must be. That rabbi went in there. So, and the guy goes, gets a cheeseburger, God forbid. Or the other thing that could happen is a person will say, look at those hypocrites. He makes out like he's so frum and so religious, and he's off going to McDonald's. What a hypocrite. And the person loses respect for for Jews and Judaism, and won't care about doing wrong things themselves. So this is maris ayin. Maris ayin can give one of those one or two, either or both of these wrong impressions. So maris ayin is sometimes things that are technically permissible, but they are forbidden because it doesn't look right. Doesn't look right.
Rabbi,
yes.
What if they're not thinking properly, but they see him getting a soda and not buying food? They're
Still, they see
thinking
someone
the
going there.
wrong thing. I'm sorry?
Yeah, still, they see the guy coming out drinking the Coke, and they think he went in there and ate something. That's how human nature goes.
But they can think all they want as long as the person, the Jew, knew what he was getting and walked out.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is that's how it should be in theory, but in practice we know that's not how it works. People are very judgmental. Human nature is to be judgmental, and one of my kids said to me, "I shouldn't judge someone." So I said, "It's okay. That person's not worthy of me judging them." Just as a joke, of course. God forbid, Which but it's the fact is, human nature. We're always judging. And usually that's healthy because that's what stops us making the wrong decisions because we're always assessing and judging situations. But unfortunately, it's not always how it works. So let's not the example I was going to give here because the example I'm going to give came post this book being written. But margarine, right? Margarine was first invented. There was a today people use it more than they use butter, right? Today it would be the other way around. There's no monosign using margarine. If you would put butter on your meat sandwich, God forbid, someone would just think, "Oh, he's using margarine." No one would even think it was butter, right? Because it's become the norm. But when it first came out, the rabbis at the time said, if you want to use it, you have to have the package on the table. Otherwise, it'll be monosign, it'll look like you're using butter. So to avoid the issue, and we mentioned last week that although technically someone could drink fish blood, it's not considered blood like an animal blood. But if you're going to have a glass of fish blood, it's monosign. It looks like he's having a drink of blood. So you have to put fish scales in it. So to make sure people realize it's fish blood and not animal blood, which of course sounds very appetizing. Nice cold glass of fish blood full of scales. Just what you need when you come home from work. But anyway, it's we're going to discuss here almond milk. Right, so it was soy didn't make it yet, and they didn't have oat milk and cashew milk and everything else. Today, it used to be you went to buy coffee and there was like 17 types of coffee. But now it's like 5 types of coffee and 23 types of milk. That's how it works. But then the power of milk they had was almond milk. So I said tavshim abasa b'chalav shkedim. Let's say you want to make a meat dish in almond milk. So you want to make a fry a schnitzel in almond milk. So what do you need to do? Could be monosign. It'll look like you're having milk and meat. So what should you do? You have to put some almonds in it or around. I mean, he's saying you should put some almonds in the dish, but technically putting some almonds around while you're making it would be sufficient. Mipnei maras ayin, because of maras ayin. So about 25 years ago, a friend of mine from Australia got engaged to a girl from Montreal. And I was in New York at the time. We're still living in Australia, but we're in New York visiting family. So we went to Montreal for
Rabbi,
yeah.
I think you have to mute the background noise.
Okay. So we went to the engagement, and it was a very fancy meat meal. And for dessert, they had chocolate that was with almond milk. So it looked and it tasted like dairy chocolate. But they put almonds in it. So everyone should be, to make it clear that it was almond milk and different things. So as an example of seeing it in real life. So sometimes you need to do things, so not only to be doing the right thing, but you have to give the appearance of doing the right thing. Okay. That's what number 15.
Rabbi, can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Where did that expression come from, Morris Iron? Where did that come from?
So Maris means the appearance, ha'ayin of the eye.
Oh, thank you.
So that's what it means. And since we mentioned it, it does remind me of a story. There's a book, I don't know if people have seen it. Black Becomes a Rainbow. It was, I think, printed in the 80s, a Feldheim book. But it was about a family, a girl from well, um, young lady at the time from Australia, and she was family wasn't so religious, and she became religious, and she went to Israel, and she married, and had a whole family, and so one of the stories in the book recounts how she came home came to Australia to visit her parents with the kids, and just as a side point, her kids thought there were synagogues everywhere in Australia. Couldn't believe it. So many synagogues. Why? Because they kept seeing these big red signs with golden arches, and they thought it was the Ten Commandments. They thought each one was a shul. Anyway, but they her mother wanted her to bring the whole family to her non-kosher Hungarian club and to have a meal there. She says, I can't bring it. It's it's not kosher. She says, well, you can bring paper plates and you bring your own food, but you sit with us and all my friends. She says, Mom, I can't do that. She says, why not? She says, because of Morris Iron. And she says, Morris who? Right? That's what happened. So it's a responsibility that we have, particularly in the more identifiably Jewish we look, the more we have to be careful how we behave in public, because human nature is, if there's a problem with us, it's not pointed at us, it's pointed at the entire Jewish people or the entire religious Jewish people and different things.
Rabbi,
Yes.
the term Arei Miklat is used in the Chumash to
Yes.
describe the cities of refuge where the unintentional killer would be able to flee and safeguard his life.
Yeah.
So one of the first times I went to Israel, I see all these signs. It says Miklat, 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 not knowing that it also means like a shelter, like a bomb shelter.
Yeah. So some people not familiar with the terms. So they had these cities of refuge. In when there's a Sanhedrin, there would be a city of refuge, and the way it worked was anyone involved in a death had to go there, and then from there the court called them, and a few things could happen. Either could be a totally justified death, maybe a self-defense, or it was something totally beyond the person's control, or he wasn't really involved, they just thought he was involved, whatever it is, and he's freed. That's one possibility. Next possibility is he was a murderer, in which case there was a death penalty usually. And the third possibility was what we'll call manslaughter, I guess. In other words, it was an accidental death, but there's some degree of negligence. And that person would have to stay in the city of refuge. He would be returned to the city of refuge after his trial. And he stayed there until the passing of the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. So it's miklat, which means refuge or shelter in a city. So in Israel, the bomb-proof rooms or basements, they call them miklat. And not the same word as means, I guess, shelter, refuge. So that's where you go. So yeah, you must have
Also,
thought there was a lot of accidental murders going on, huh?
also in the 70s is when the Rebbe started the Mivtzayim campaign. And each individual mitzvah in singular was a mitzvah. What's this translation is of the mitzvah? Mitzvah?
It's a
Mitzvahim?
campaign.
Campaign, right.
Yeah.
So the Rebbe is drumming up all this excitement about the mitzvahim and each mitzvah, not mitzvah, but mitzvah, each campaign, like the Tefillin campaign, the Shabbos lady campaign. So I go to Israel and I see in all these store windows, mitzvah, mitzvah, mitzvah. not knowing that the word mivsa means sail.
Yeah. It's a slightly different word, but it sounds the same. Yeah. Yeah. So you have that's how it goes, But my favorite one was, a lot of people have get gas delivered. Sometimes you get gas delivered, a gas, for your stove or something in the tank. So we get smaller ones normally for like the barbecue or something, but you get bigger ones for a house. So they're called balloonim. So there's people talking about their balloonim, and I just presume they're talking about balloons. And then after a while, I realized, okay, they're not talking about balloons. Okay, but I have no idea what they're talking about. Took a little bit of a while, but we worked it out. Anyway, Tesvav, number 15.
Rabbi, the
Yeah,
balloon actually looked like a balloon. That's the reason why they called it.
probably. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised as where it came from. If that is, yeah, it could be.
Which
Yeah,
parent? I'm sorry.
So, Memvov, 46,
Thank you.
not 15. So what we're going to do is like this. Technically, let's first of all speak technically, then we'll see what the problem is here. Let's say I have a meat pot, and I've used it for meat, but I'm limited. I don't have too many pots, so it's perfectly clean. I didn't use it for 24 hours, and I want to use it for dairy. So we'll speak theoretically now before we speak about practically. So I kasher it, and let's presume it's the materials, doesn't have plastic handles or handles. But let's say it's all the materials that are easy to kasher, and I kasher it. So theoretically, it's now back to parv, and I could use it for dairy. And then next week, again, theoretically, it's perfectly clean. I didn't use it for more than 24 hours. I'll kasher it, use for meat again. Now, some people I see already shaking their heads because this is a recipe for disaster. Because if this pot is one day meat and 2 days later is milk, 3 days later is meat, then it's going to happen. It's going to get used the wrong way. So therefore, number 15, nahagim, we have a custom. So it's not an absolute law, but it's a custom, and it's brought in big Shulchan Aruch. So a custom brought in Shulchan Aruch almost has the power of halacha. We do not kasher dairy pots and utensils to use them for meat or vice versa. Right? We need to avoid it. Now, if someone really has to, and it's really going to be a one-off, so there's a discussion we can have, but we want to avoid it. Like it's this couple once told me that they have one oven. And I told me how they kashered him to. I mean, they weren't listening. I tried to tell them that this is a disaster waiting to happen. Right? Anyway, some people are too clever for themselves. So therefore, we have a custom not to kasher from one to the other to avoid this issue. So once it's something that we don't do, so something became not kosher. Let's say it got mixed up. It got used to the wrong thing by mistake. It's not kosher, or something else happened. So then we could kasher use whichever one we want, regardless of which one it was before. But this to take a kosher meat utensil and make it now a dairy utensil, or vice versa, we don't do that. This is presuming it's something that can be easily kashered, because not necessarily everything can. Okay, test sign number 16. Yayin, wine, obasa, and meat, v'chatichas dog, and pieces of fish. She'ain by simon, that there's no sign on it. So we're going to speak about it in a moment. What kind of signs? Shemafkidim oisholchem biyad akum, that was deposited or delivered by a non-Jew, is going to be problematic. So we're going to come. So let's speak about this, and we'll speak about how we get around it. See, the thing is like this: certain foods are not problematic being in the hands of non-Jews. So let's use apples for an example. So the apple orchard was a non-Jewish farmer, and he picked the apples all out of Israel. Let's just keep it simple in America. and they load them in boxes and they deliver them, and it comes to the supermarket, and it's all non-Jews there. And you go to buy an apple. There's not, as long as you see it's an apple and it's not cooked and it's a regular raw apple, there's not much that can go wrong with an apple, right? Meat, though, is problematic. So let's say even now we've shechted the meat, we've kashered it, it's perfect, but we put it in the hands of a non-Jewish delivery driver, let's say. So he's on the way, and he decides, you know what, he's hungry, so he eats some, but then he knows he's gonna have to replace it. So he may potentially go to the supermarket and get a new piece, right? So meat, we're going to say, is going to have two seals. The same with pieces of fish. When I say pieces of fish, meaning if it's raw fish that still has the skin, then you can see that it had scales and various things. So let's say for example, a piece of salmon. So the combination of the color, the only other fish that have the same color are also kosher and has the skin and different things. So you can okay. But if it's chopped up fish, let's say like canned tuna or something, could have been anything chopped up. Once it's chopped up, you don't know what it is. There's no way to tell. Wine, as we said in a earlier, we're worried that the non-Jew may have used the wine or dedicated to their idol. So all of these things is problematic. Once it goes into non-Jewish hands, very problematic. And just to mention this is not only deliveries people and so this is even, some people have domestic help at home. They might have a clean lady or something, and sometimes they're not Jewish and different things. So if they're left in the house for extended periods of time on their own, and maybe a person has some kosher meat in the fridge or the freezer, can also have the same issue. So obviously it depends, if someone has a frozen chicken and they're there for an hour on their own, and you come back and there's frozen chicken, I mean, they weren't really able to defrost it, cook it, eat it, replace it in that time. But if a person, let's say, had a barbecue chicken, and person could have eaten that chicken and replaced it with a different barbecue chicken that wasn't, a piece of it. Especially you couldn't tell the difference between, one drumstick and another drumstick. It's all pretty much the same. So people have to be careful, and sometimes people don't think about it because of their house. There's a fellow that I know. He speaks. I'm sure this. I don't know him that well, but he travels and he speaks. And he told the story one time that when he was traveling to a certain place to eat, he got his kosher meal, and he opened it up, and he was just about to eat it, but he really had to go to the bathroom. So he went to the bathroom, and he came back, and he was about to sit down and eat again. But then he thought to himself, we have this law. It's not only once you leave meat unattended, that no Jew is watching it, and there's non-Jews around, um, you're not allowed to eat it anymore. Because maybe he's it's being. And he thought to himself, why would someone on the airplane, and and he's really hungry, it's a long trip, but he decided, at the end of the day, what can you do? That's the halacha, that's the Jewish law. He's not going to eat it. So he's in there. He just ate the little piece of cake that came with it, different things, and he left the main meal. And the fellow next to him, after a while, he says, "I notice you're not eating. Is there a reason?" So he explained this concept that if you leave something um, unprotected, it's not being watched by a Jewish person, you can't eat the meat anymore. And the fellow says to him, says, "Wow, that's really impressive, your religion, because I actually took your meal." He says to him, I swapped my chicken with your chicken, so I wanted to taste what does kosher chicken taste like. So it saved him. It saved him. So all of these things. So wine, meat, and pieces of fish. Now, if there's no simon, we're going to loosely translate simon as, in this respect, as a identifying characteristic. Okay, and we'll come back to what they might be in a moment. But if there's not a way to tell it, so I mean, for example, one of the sages of the Talmud, when he would send meat to his family, he used to cut all the pieces in triangles of a certain size. And his family knew if the meat came looking like that, that was from him. Looked any other way or not the right size, not quite the right shape, it wasn't from him. But we'll come back to, so if there's no sign, I mean, normally you have, let's say, a steak. There's no identifying feature that you can tell one piece of steak from another piece of steak. So this is if it was deposited or transported by a non-Jew. Mikosh can be ad Yisrael choshed. And how much more so if you have a Jew who is literally suspect. But in other words, we see this person, unfortunately, has a history. Even though Jews should be there for each other, but sometimes we see that, unfortunately, it's not the case. So these foods, tzarich shnei chosamot, they need 2 seals. 1 seal is not enough; needs 2 seals. So if you look at the kosher wine, generally speaking, the cork is considered a seal. That's why it normally has a kosher emblem or something on the cork, and then there's another seal on top. The meat, when it goes to a supermarket, on top of whatever packaging they have, they normally have like a tape, a kosher tape or something that goes around it. So it makes a second seal, or it's in something inside a box, or something like that, right? To give it 2 seals. So that's what needs to happen. Avul yayim avushal, but cooked wine, as we mentioned, cooked wine can't be used for worship. So most opinions say that the wine that's pasteurized is considered cooked wine. Similarly, wine vinegar after it's already been made into vinegar. Chalov and milk, or pas and bread, gavina and cheese. Sagi b'choisim echad. They only need one seal, right? And the reason that only needs 1 seal, the ones that need 2 seals, it's because it's a Torah prohibition. In other words, if the meat gets replaced, non-kosher meat is a Torah prohibition. It's so we have 2 seals to protect it. The cheese, for example, is rabbinic prohibition, because in practice you can only make cheese out of the milk from a kosher animal. You can't make cheese out of milk from a non-kosher animal. So in theory, all cheese should be kosher. However, the sages had a concern because this is from the Greek occupation times pre-Hanukkah. What they did is they mixed a little bit of non-kosher milk into the milk to make cheese out of. And because the majority, let's just say 80-20%. And what happened was enough to make the cheese. The cheese worked. Might have been a little bit softer, but it made the cheese. But non-kosher things were mixed in. So therefore, to avoid this, we say that a Jew has to oversee the cheese making process. And then we put 1 seal, because if God forbid it did get exchanged, most likely it's kosher anyway. I mean, it's not kosher. I'm not trying to minimize the rabbinic prohibition, but it becomes a rabbinic kashrus issue. So whenever it's a Torah kashrus issue, we require 2 seals, and when it's a rabbinic kashrus issue, we require at least 1 seal. Okay. Next situation. Yud Zayin. Im shlech or mafkid eze davar besak. You are sending something or you're depositing something by a non-Jew, and it's in a sack. Right? Like potato. Generally, we only get potatoes in sacks nowadays, but it used to be more common. What you need to do is the stitching has to be on the inside, right? When they make the sack, the stitching of the three sides that are closed up before you put stuff in has to be on the inside. Because if the stitching is on the outside, then anyone who wants to, doesn't matter if it's sealed or not, can just open up the stitching, take, exchange, and stitch back up, right? So the stitching has to be on the inside. And then the top has to be tied and sealed. So they some type of knot with a single seal over the top. If it's a food that needs one seal, and on top of the knot, you'd have to put two seals if it was a type of food that needed two seals. Okay, you're the test number 18. So let's say you need to send with a non-Jewish person an animal or a bird, and it's been shechted. And it happened that it got sent without a seal. So Yasesh Halas Chochem. Now you have to ask a rabbi what to do. There are sometimes mitigating factors, but generally it's going to be a problem. So today what they do is when they transport, often today the place where they commercially shecht is not necessarily the place where the meat is processed. So they normally put a stamp, right, on the carcass. That's the first thing. And then they put a lock on the truck. That's one of the things they do. Okay, number 19. Now, cheeses and other things that a non-Jew has in their possession. Now, even though they're sealed, right? Has a kosher seal, or it's printed on them, the kosher. As long as we don't know who actually sealed them or put the kosher sign on it, they're prohibited. So what do I mean like this? If the cheese comes sealed, we don't know who sealed it. Maybe the non-Jew sealed it, and it doesn't mean anything. If it just printed on it kosher, it also doesn't necessarily mean anything. Who decided it was kosher, right? So this is unfortunately has led to the kosher certification industries we have today. Now it's a necessary evil because without it, anyone could put anything, right, kosher on anything, and it won't mean anything. But it's led to, in many places you have this whole alphabet soup, of all different certifying agencies, and you don't know who they are and where they come from, and and what standards they have. So this is why it's very important, not only that it has some type of kosher certification, there should be a kosher certification that you can trust. Now, if you don't know, one of the places you can look, the CRC from Chicago, the kosher authority there, on their website, they have quite a substantial list of other certifying bodies they accept. So it's just a good place to see. There's some of them are not so well known. So that's a good place to look. So,
Rabbi,
but it's always a mix. Yes.
I'm sure maybe you heard something like this where the person said, I bought this food and it's got a seal on it. It's Orthodox rabbis. It's an R inside a circle.
right? Yeah, or the best one is the C inside a circle.
Right.
Oh, it says kosher. C. Yeah, right. It's and it's when I was living in Brisbane, I once did did it a few times actually. I supervised oil going onto a ship, which is actually quite scary, actually, but that's another story. But um, the so I had my own kashrus at the time. It was called there was QK, Queensland Kashrus. Now we really had it just to be able to have food to eat. That was the main thing. It wasn't really a money maker, but we had a bakery and a few other different places. So I got subcontracted by the MK, which is now Kosher Australia, but then it was the Mizrahi Kosher, the Melbourne Kosher, who was being subcontracted by the OU to put this oil onto a ship that was going to go to a facility under the Star K, but the final product was under the OK. So that's just there you go. So that's how it worked. So you really need to make sure when you see kosher certification, you know it's a good one, not just the
Rabbi,
fact that it says something kosher.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
I'll tell you just a real fast story that I heard a lecture in Toronto by Rabbi Levi, the original Rabbi Levi Olav Shalom of OK. Is it Beryl?
Well, he was one out for many, many years. Actually, originally started by his father.
Yeah,
But,
so this was
yeah.
by Beryl Levy, I think. And he told us that he took over supervision of a ship that had oil. It was a whole oil filled tanker. And previously it had been done by OU, and now they did it by OK. So he came in and did the whatever koshering they did, and he asked to see the um, the docket,
Manifest. Yeah.
yeah, of what was in there before, which apparently nobody had ever looked before. And before this, they had pesticides in the boat, uh, whatever that tank where the oil is. They had pesticides, and whoever came in before that, if they didn't look to see the docket of what was in there before, they just went in and koshered it. The remnants of
Yeah.
the pesticide wasn't necessarily being taken care of.
Well, since you mentioned it, I'll tell you about it. I mean, it's actually most kosher authorities be very happy with pesticides. The first thing you have to do is look in the ship's manifest, and you wanted the last 3 loads not to be a food item. So petroleum, all these things were great. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is you had to go into the um into the bowels of the ship and actually take a look and make sure there's nothing in there. So there's a manhole, right? It's a manhole, and you go down a ladder to a platform, then the stairs. So you're a few stories down. And meanwhile, they're heating up this oil in a hose that's going to come down this manhole. And it's a Thai ship. No one speaks English. And I'm down in the bowels, with a flashlight checking it. And I keep looking up at this little manhole. I was like so worried they're going to start pumping this hot oil. That was and there's rust, all these kinds of things in there. But this is no kosher problems. So you'd be surprised. It's good friend of mine who worked in an ice cream factory said, if you ever worked in an ice cream factory, you would never eat ice cream. You know, that was um anyway. I don't want to put anyone off their lunch or something, you know. It's but you know, this is the world we live in.
They didn't have to kill any animals to make ice cream, though.
That's true. You know, people worried about, microplastics, different things. And I'm not saying it's not an issue, but I think I think there's so many more basic issues in commercially produced food before you even get to uh you know, these things. But
I'm afraid to ask you what the problem with the ice cream was.
he didn't say. And since I like ice cream, I didn't ask.
Good idea.
All right. So number 20. You have to make sure that a Jew and a non-Jew, or in other words, someone who keeps kosher, someone who doesn't keep kosher, they shouldn't cook two pots next to each other. Zeh basa kosher, zeh basa treifa. This one with kosher meat, this one not kosher meat. Now, before you even start thinking to yourself, like, how, why, what's going on? So a lot of small villages used to have one massive oven, and it was pretty hot. You know, it was wood burning, so it really sort of cut it out in between. You know, and there used to be like a communal oven, and like everyone would put their cholent in this one big communal oven. So there could be times, or people barbecuing in the park, and someone else is barbecuing nearby. I mean, exactly how nearby I have to see. But what we want to do is not have our kosher food next to non-kosher food. Probably sounds obvious, but if you don't say it, as we know, one of the most uncommon things in life is common sense. So we need to state the obvious. Now, imakadeirus or machavas megulois. Now, if the pans, the pots, the fry pans are uncovered, then they can't be together. You know, it's always going to be a problem because there's steam, there's splattering, there's what's going to happen is there's going to be transference, and we're going to end up the kosher meat will not be kosher. However, let's say it's not covered. Let's say, for example, airline meals, right? Let's talk about airline meals. So the airline meals are usually double, or at least double, often triple wrapped. They're sealed. So it's considered a vessel inside another vessel, inside another vessel. Triple wrap doesn't mean you just wrap the foil around 3 times, because that's really one vessel, because it's one thing. But if it's properly sealed, so you get the airline meal, normally there's a packet inside and it's actually sealed, and then there's another foil on top, and there's usually another layer of foil on top of that. So that goes into these non-kosher ovens that are on the airplane, right? They don't kosher the airplanes, but because since there's no moisture in between the layers, so the flavor will not get beyond the first level. There's nothing to transfer it to the second level. So that's how they do that. And the protocol should be that they do the kosher meals first. And that's often, when they do that properly, always kosher meals, most of the time you get your meal for everyone else does, and haha, it's everyone else as I'm enjoying my but it's but even if it didn't happen that way, even if they was in at the same time, because it's totally it's triple sealed, triple non waterproof, and it's not going to be problematic. But if it's open in any way, they cannot be together. Now, so not only do you have to be careful as in general, but you shouldn't leave your pots that you cook in the hands of non-Jewish domestic help. When there's no Jew in the house, or at least a Jew going in and out, because again, they might make themselves some lunch, and they may make lunch some pasta, cheese pasta, in the meat pot, or vice versa, or maybe even heat up their own food in the kosher pot. And we're not saying maliciously. They don't have an understanding of kashrus or the importance of kashrus. Look, unfortunately, there's plenty of people in life. You have to actually be careful about them being malicious. But at least but this people who don't know what kosher is, again, it's just it's a disaster waiting to happen.
Or they made a mistake or an accident and they're afraid to say.
Correct. Yeah, and it could even be they made a mistake and they realize, whoops, made a mistake, and they're worried about losing their job, so they're not going to say anything. It's one of the things just where they have one of the challenges kosher supervision in China. I don't know if it's the entire China, but there's certain areas in China where culturally, not to be a liar, it's called being polite culturally, is you tell the person what you think they want to hear. Try and give them good news. That's being polite. So if there was a mistake in the factory, you don't tell them that, especially if you fixed it. You fixed the problem. You just tell them there wasn't any problem. And again, it's not to lie or to cheat. It's just culturally that's you be positive. You make your guest happy by telling them what they want to hear. So when it's kosher inspectors come in and they ask what's going on, and they say, yeah, everything's gone smooth according to protocol, and not necessarily has. And again, like I said, it's not necessarily people trying to cheat or be dishonest anyway. It's just a cultural but it does make kosher supervision challenging. Right, so you have to have cameras and there's a lot of things. Anyway, it's so you can have someone who they're afraid of losing their jobs. They don't want to say that they draped up your kitchen, even though in a certain respect you'd be much happier if they did than if they didn't tell you. Much happier they told you than not. Not that you want to hear that news, but
Whenever I
Okay,
have
21.
whenever I have a worker in the house that uses something or is washing dishes, I always tell them, please tell me if you made a mistake. I don't mind. Just let me know. That's the main thing.
Yeah. Someone we don't know, they keep kosher. So also you're not allowed to purchase wine from them. Or shadavarim, or other things, that we have a concern that it may be prohibited. Right? So there's someone that don't keep kosher themselves. We see it's not something they value, even though they may be Jewish. We have to be careful what we buy from them, because if kashrus has no inherent value to them, then what do they care? Mihu, however, in this arch etzloi, if you're their guest, you could eat with him as long as he's not known to be suspect. So let's go back a step. Someone who we know is suspect, they just don't keep kosher, then we're stuck. But let's say there's a religious, someone that we presume, there's no reason to suspect him. We just don't know him. So technically, you could eat there. I mean, I'm not sure today. This was at a time where this is written at a time where generally people were either Jewish or they weren't. People, pretty much everyone kept kosher, so you could just have presumption that someone who was obviously Jewish had a certain standard of kashrus. I'm not sure if you could presume that today. It's and if you do, unfortunately, there's also people who may be very well-meaning, but also very ignorant. It's generally in Phoenix, we don't eat in other people's houses. Yeah, not chas v'shalom, not trying to be holier than thou or something. But the problem is in the community you have a large spectrum of observance and knowledge and lack thereof. And we sort of feel like if we eat in one person's house and not another person's house, then people are going to be offended. Well, if the rabbi has a policy that he doesn't eat at people's house because he doesn't want to offend anyone, then no one gets offended because they don't think they're the one who you won't eat at, even if they are. So it makes it easier. I mean, obviously I eat at my kids' houses, live in the community, but not but generally speaking, we don't go to other people's in the community. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that as a policy for anyone here, just using an example of how, just one example of how to navigate. There's plenty of others, plenty of other. Let's squeeze in one more.
Yeah, but when you do that, you end up with a very big expense of all the people you have to have over.
That's true. That's true. We have all the guests. That's true.
Right.
You know.
You welcome them, and they want rabbi time. They don't want necessarily your cooking. That's what they
Yeah,
want. So,
well, they certainly don't want my cooking, but they enjoy my wife's cooking.
Baruch Hashem.
Oh, sure. Yeah. All right. Number 22. So you have to be careful. You want to avoid leaving food utensils in a non-Jew's house because he may use it. One, but now, even if you give me a craftsman to fix it, I mean, today we don't normally fix. They used to pot had a problem. You would weld on a piece. And today generally we live a higher standard of living. Things are broken, we throw them away. And even if we do get it fixed, it's normally the person's store and house aren't really connected anymore. The people used to work from the home, a room in the home. And if you left it there, then maybe they'll use it. Because because you may be, if you do have a concern that it was used, that you did leave your pot there, you have a concern it was used. So now now you have to ask a rabbi what to do next. So it becomes problematic. Just back to what I was saying before about people having different standards of kashrus in the home. This also, part of this can be the different. We said before that not every kosher certifying agency is necessarily so marvelous. So you have some who just have low standards, and then you have some that might have high standards, but they don't have very good procedures to ensure their standards are actually being met. So they have high standards in theory, but in practice it's not really happening. And then there can be, so you can end up having a certain kosher certification that you wouldn't feel comfortable with, but perhaps people who aren't aware, they say, oh, it's kosher certified, and and they buy it, and sometimes it's a very well-meaning. I just wanted to clarify that it's not necessarily people trying to take shortcuts with the kashrus, or people trying to beat the system. It's often ignorance. It's one of those things, especially out of town. There's less of the less products with the better hechsherim. But one of the things today, Baruch Hashem, we live in a time where you can get everything. For example, we get a lot of kosher products unavailable here. We get on Amazon, right? We get certain chips for the kids with better hechsher. We get it delivered on Amazon. The Chol Yisrael milk you can buy here, but if we want, sometimes we buy long life milk. You know, it doesn't have to go in the fridge till it's opened. It's in a Tetra Pak, and so delivered on Amazon. You know, it's a lot. Today we live in a time, Baruch Hashem, where as difficult as things are, there seems the world's becoming smaller, it's becoming easier. All right. Anyway, Hashem should bless everyone with lots of success in kashrus and everything else.
Rabbi,
Thank you, Rabbi.
just a real fast story. I went once to a chasana, to a wedding in Toronto, and I was sitting near Rabbi David Shachat, who happens to be his first yahrzeit is today. So a fellow came over and said, Rabbi Shachat, I want to go to a restaurant. Can I eat it? What about this restaurant? Is this okay to go to? He says, no. He asked the second restaurant. He asked the third restaurant. He says, I won't go there. I won't go there. I won't go there. So finally, another fellow sitting at the table says, Rabbi Shachat, you don't go to any restaurants, Steve. He says, yeah, but if I did, I won't go there.
That's right.
Very good.
He's was a great man, actually. I studied a little bit under him. So big time chacham, and very practical as well. Right, Michelle, wonderful week. We'll see you around next week, God willing.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you,
Thank you,
David.
Rabbi.